Hello and welcome. My name is Melanie.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Murder State of Mind. For those of you who might be just joining us for this podcast, we go state by state discussing true crime cases that happened out of that state. And today, you just so happen to be joining us for Alaska. Have you ever been?
Never, ever.
I haven't been either, even though it's a really beautiful state.
I'm dying to go to Banff. I've talked about it with my sister, but
I don't even know what that is.
It's a national park
out
there.
Cool.
Gorgeous.
I was like, is that a cool way of saying, like my brain went to Burbank, and I was like, no, that's wrong.
I'm pretty hip,
state.
so I know the terms.
That's cool.
Whoop.
You know, and I was also kind of surprised just how many true crimes I found from the state of Alaska. I was actually really surprised about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, you think of like the open space, the pretty low amount of people out there in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Kind of a perfect storm for some terrible crimes.
Yeah, like of course I expected like the national park stuff, which that's a whole separate discussion we can get into with maybe like an extra episode if you guys would want that. But yeah, I expected that, but I did not expect the amount of true crime that I found for this state.
I mean, you think of it as the last frontier, as they always say too, so just how sparse resources can be and how spread apart people really are, it can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. So, Brooke, would you like to go first again?
I would love to. So, my story for us takes us to Sitka, Alaska, where we meet Jessica Baggen. And Jessica Baggen had just turned 16 years old. She loved to cook, loved spending time with family and friends. And on the eve of her 16th birthday, she went to her sister's house, which was a mile from her parents' home. She walked there. She celebrated. You can find pictures of her opening her gifts that night online. And then she proceeded to walk home using a pretty well-trafficked bike trail near a local school out there. Unfortunately, however, she did not make it home that night. So her parents woke up the next morning to find that she was not at home. Frantic, of course, as any parent would be, called their other daughter, her sister's house that she had gone to. Her sister hadn't heard anything from her. So the parents did call the police officers, and a missing persons report was very quickly filed. This was a case that actually had really good coverage and actually had really good action being taken, so she was found that same day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was found right off of the trail, really poorly covered. Like, we're talking a really shallow ditch. Someone really quickly tried to cover it up with brush and leaves. So not a whole lot of thought going into that. She actually had dirt within her mouth, showed signs of sexual assault and asphyxiation. So that led them to believe they had a very specific type of person they were looking for. So they went on the case really quickly, but lo and behold, they didn't have to do a lot of work in searching for a culprit, because 11 days after Jessica was murdered, an individual came forward. This man worked at that college that she was nearby on that trail. He was a janitor there. And he actually came forward because he had noted how he partied a lot, he'd black out, and so one of his friends actually that said, maybe you did murder this girl, right? Can you imagine?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, your friend's like, by the way, here's someone that died recently.
Tell me you have a problem without telling me you have a problem.
Ding, ding, ding,
oh
right
my
there. So Richard turns himself in. He also says, yeah, when I black out, I get these visions of things that happen, and I had a vision that I was following this young girl, and the next thing I know, I'm washing my hands as if I had done something. So of course the cops are very interested in this man's confession. Then we find out he does have some developmental delays, and there's concern about police coercion in this story as well. Come to find out, the details that Richard described as far as what Jessica was wearing that night and how she looked overall didn't match. Also, the evidence they found on Jessica that night did not match either. So that crosses Richard off the list. And so that leaves police with nothing now. I mean, they have DNA, but we gotta remember this is 1996. So maybe they can blood type it.
Right.
Put it into CODIS.
Right.
And not much beyond that. Because when they put it into CODIS, which is that database that shows all sex offenders, nothing is a match at that time. So it's one of those things where they did as much as they could, as quickly as they could in that really short time frame, right? We're talking quick action in those 48 hours, but they find nothing. Now we're going to fast forward 24 years. So I don't know if you've heard about the Golden State Killer.
Yes.
Okay.
For sure.
So this story kind of ties to it, but just to pause Jessica's story, we'll kind of talk about the Golden State Killer. Was that individual who assaulted and killed multiple women in the 70s and 80s in San Francisco area, and no one was ever able to find out who it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when genetic genealogy was brought up. So they decided to use both genetics. So once the human genome was sourced, they were able to use that side of actually picking apart someone's genetic material, combine it with genealogy, looking at census, obituaries, all that stuff, to pinpoint an individual. So they used the DNA that from the Golden State Killer, like they used the DNA from what they found on Jessica's body, put it into something called GED match. So my resources described it as like a Facebook of DNA. So people can voluntarily upload their genetic material from 23andMe and Ancestry.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
that so cool?
It's wild to me.
It's definitely the future, in my opinion. Yeah, we can talk more about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to pick your brain about that, because that takes us into a whole nother avenue of just legality.
Yeah.
So they used genetic genealogy involved in Jessica's case, and they did get a match. This match, his name, Stephen Branch. So Stephen Branch did match living in Sitka, Alaska at that time that Jessica was murdered. And additionally, he also, the next month, was arrested for an assault of another young woman. He was arrested, but he was not put in jail. He was acquitted of the charges, naturally.
Of course.
So he moved to Arkansas in 2010. And so once this individual does pop up on the Alaskan officer's radar with the genetic genealogy, they get in touch with the Arkansas police officers, and they inform them, you have an individual living there who does match the DNA we found on a murder victim, multiple decades ago. So the Arkansas police officers go to Stephen's house in August of 2020.
Oh.
And so they question him. They're like, we have DNA that matched at this scene. Are you willing to give us DNA? And do you know anything about this case at all? He denies knowing anything about the case. He refuses to give DNA. Not a great looking thing for him. So they know it's going to be a long road to try and get some answers from this guy. So they leave with, the intention of getting a warrant. But come and find out, 30 minutes after the officers left, he killed himself.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Thankfully, they were able to obtain DNA post-mortem, and the DNA did match at the scene. So this case was solved, with Stephen Branch being the murderer. And it's the third high-profile case to be solved with this genetic genealogy. And what they're talking about for the future of criminal justice with this is some real Black Mirror stuff in my mind. It's eerily accurate.
There's going to be no such thing as cold cases anymore. I really feel this is the future and this is the wave. Actually, I listened to a podcast I really recommend. It's by the YouTube channel Criminally Listed, but they have a podcast. I can't think of what it's called right now, but I'll link it in our description box. Or if you're listening to us on podcast platform, be sure to check out our YouTube, and I'll link it there. But basically, he was saying on his podcast that the oldest known case now that they've solved with this genetic genealogy is like 50 or 60 years old.
Incredible.
I think they even maybe did a 70, but I'm not for sure. But
oh yeah,
it's just not going to be a thing anymore.
And it's opening the door to the idea that your DNA isn't private. So as much good is coming from this, they saw a huge increase of people uploading their DNA results into GEDmatch, like I talked about, to solve more crimes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not uploading just your DNA. It's your entire family's DNA. And so the legality as far as if you can be denied certain things for having certain health conditions, etc., there's some gray area involved there. But I agree with you. I think it's really the future. There's nothing that's going to stop it at this point.
No, because I mean, I myself am like actually hopefully he's not listening, but for my brother's birthday, I wanted to do an ancestry me and have it do on me and him just to kind of see. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody's doing it basically, and I think also people use it on ancestry.com to find past relatives or people that are adopted, or using it to using it to find their birth families, and yeah. So to me, like, I think the people that are worried about it are worried for a reason, because maybe there's skeletons in the closet they don't want to be found out, but.
So overall, more good than bad you see with this.
I see it because, I mean, God forbid if something happened to me or my daughter, I would want answers and I would want the person to be found. Or even my husband or family member. I would want answers and I would want to know.
And just imagine living near someone that for years and years got away with something like this.
Yeah. And I don't even know the right word to describe him. Like, I don't know if he's selfish or chicken, but like, really, to kill yourself, like that is the most cowardly, yes. Such a coward. He couldn't even face the music. That just makes me so mad.
And I mean, you're going to see so many more people like that. We've seen a lot stand trial, but there's going to be a lot of people that.
I almost wonder if the police hadn't went and talked to him directly and had like surreptitiously stolen a cup or something or a cigarette butt instead, then arrested him, if maybe he could have been standing trial. But instead, they went and questioned him, brought it to his knowledge, and therefore he killed himself.
Right. That's a good point you make, because they do that plenty of times. They call the voluntary giving of evidence by taking, like you said, that coffee cup. So who's to say they did it the right way or the wrong way? Maybe they wanted to give him an out or a time to make that confession. But, I mean, living that long with that kind of a lie, you're not really an honorable person at that point.
My gosh.
And it was, I believe they said, an aunt that they linked the DNA to. But just the idea of, like, if you upload your DNA, having, police officers come to you and say, do any of your relatives have any ties to this area at this time? Because they have to one by one go through this family tree, and they can do, second, third cousins. And that's why they say if 2% of the nation's population does upload their information to this GED match, then we have the capability of solving all these crimes. Granted, there's DNA left over.
Yeah. I was listening to a case, and sorry that I'm going off on a tangent, but I was listening to a case too where genetic genealogy almost seemed like it let them down for the first time, because they matched it to these two brothers and they were so sure it was one of their two brothers, but the genes just didn't quite match. And even though it made sense, everything added up, but there's something just didn't make sense. But come to find out, there was this brother that no one knew about that the mom had in like a previous marriage and had just completely cut ties with. And it was him that actually committed the murder. So one of his stepbrothers, I believe that's the right term, almost got this murder charge. Yeah, half-brother, He almost got this murder charge because of this unknown brother. Like,
That's the other side of the danger, though, because they're saying, like, this is a great tool, but it's also dangerous in, like, making a jury, like, trying to explain genetics to a jury that might have no science background.
Right.
You really have to compel them and make this into terms that is understandable.
Right. Like, I think forensics is such a thing now in a courtroom that not a lot of people can dismiss it, but genealogy, though, is a whole separate thing, though, for sure. But yeah, I really do think it's the wave of the future. I'm really excited you brought this up with your topic, though, because it's actually super interesting to me, and
incredibly relevant.
Yeah, I've been doing some research into it, and
show your nerd card. Yeah,
a little bit.
But yeah, I'm interested to see down the line what changes do come from it, good and bad. No one's going to stop it. It's just seeing what the results are.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that was super cool.
Glad you liked it.
Yeah, that was a good story.
An actual solved one too. I felt like I could change it up from keeping you on edge there.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad Jessica's family got answers, even though it wasn't quite what they wanted in the end with him being a coward. But at least they got answers, which
to consider the case closed is.
Considering our last episode, we had 2 families, both with no answers. So. Yeah.
I'm glad you liked it. Thanks for listening.
Of course. All right, so my case is the case of William Michael Christian, and he was born on March 6th, 1949. So, it was November in Anchorage, Alaska, in the year of 1966. Anchorage at the time only had a population of about 271,000, which compared to now it's about 282,000. William Michael Christian, who liked to go by Mike, was only 17 years old, and he lived with his parents on a small street called North Star Road. Basically, Mike, and I'm going to refer to him as this name because that appears to be what he liked to go by, he was your average 17-year-old who absolutely adored his car, which is a 1963 Impala sedan. So in Anchorage, there are 2 high schools, it sounds like. There was a East High School and a West High School. Mike started off his senior year at East High School, and he was actually doing this kind of secretly because due to his address and location, he was actually supposed to attend West High School. He just preferred East because that's where all his friends were attending. And this lasted for a while, but somehow word got out to some school officials, and Mike ended up having to transfer to West High School. He was understandably bummed at the time, but that quickly turned around when he met a girl named Judy Breaker. Judy, like himself, was also a transfer student from West High School. I think that and the fact that Mike was a pretty good-looking guy with a nice car, the couple hit it right off. However, what Mike didn't know was that Judy had just broke up with an 18-year-old guy named Roger Patty from her old school. Of course, word quickly got out that these 2 were dating, and Roger was immediately furious that his ex most likely broke up with him for this new guy. Pretty shortly after, this pretty intense rivalry grew between these 2 boys, and it got even worse when word got to Roger that Mike was starting to carry around a gun with him. So therefore, Roger says, allegedly, that he got a gun from a friend to protect himself. And for those of you, I know you can't see me, I did air quotes.
Powerful air quotes.
So on the night of November 3rd, Mike left his parents' house to run a few errands and see a movie at the drive-in theater. He left the house driving his beloved car, and his parents expected him back later that evening. After the movie was over, Mike called Judy and the 2 had a brief discussion. Judy says that during this phone call, Mike seemed very happy and upbeat. He told her that his only other plans for the evening was he was going to wash his car and attend a car meeting. The 2 hung up the phone, and this was the last time Judy ever talked to her boyfriend. Later that evening, Mike didn't return home, and his parents weren't too worried. He was a 17-year-old on the brink of adulthood. They just assumed he ran into a friend while he was out and about and decided to stay there. Because we had to remember, this was 1966, long time before cell phones. They really weren't too worried at all. That was until his beloved car was found abandoned in town the next day. They knew something had to be wrong because they knew how much that car meant to Mike. A police report was immediately filed, as well as a reward of $500, which is roughly about $4,000 in today's time. And this was all set up for Mike. However, sadly, after about 3 months, the reward was discontinued, and the parents say this was because of the behest of the police, asking them to take the reward back. For 8 years, Mike's case sat cold on the shelf. For 8 years, his parents wondered what could have possibly happened to their boy. His mother was getting pretty upset with the police because they decided to mark Mike's file as a runaway.
Wow.
And just to diverge a little bit, there was some rumors, I guess, at the time that maybe he had run away to Seattle or other parts of the United States.
Without his car that he loves.
Exactly, but this is never To me, it just sounded like it was just rumor mill type of gossip.
Do we know if they did talk to Roger, or is that something?
I don't know. Well,
Wow.
we'll get there.
Okay.
Mike's case would have continued to grow cold if it wasn't for a man named James Ronald Etheridge. In 1974, James was now a 26-year-old man who was wanting to become a police officer. So I guess during a police interview, a part of their process is to do a polygraph test. And a question was posed to him that said, "Do you know of any unsolved felonies?" Little did the officers know that asking this question would be the break they needed for Mike Christian's case.
What?
And James' tale went as follows. So on the night of November 3rd, 1966, Roger Patty and Mike Christian decided to meet to discuss Judy and their rivalry. They met out at this road where the two got into a heated discussion about Judy. Roger allegedly said something along the lines of "stay away from my girl." The argument then turned physical. It was during the physical part of this fight that Roger pulled his gun out. Mike saw this and tried to wrestle the gun away. It was during this altercation with the gun that Roger shot Mike in the head. Mike fell back against a car window where Roger allegedly shot Mike a second time. Once Roger knew Mike was dead, he quickly loaded Mike's body into his trunk of his car and he took off. And here is where it gets crazy for me. Somewhere along the way, Roger got a flat tire and he had to stop along the side of a road. It was then that this other teenager, Arthur Melican, I think is how you say his name, saw his friend and decided to stop and help. It must have been pretty early into the conversation when Roger was like, "Hey, I got this dude in my trunk.
Oh my gosh.
I can't just leave him in there or the cops will find out. Want to help a buddy out?" That's just my recreation. So somehow Roger convinced Arthur to let him load Mike's body into Arthur's car.
No.
And these two then drove to James Etheridge's house, the man who is confessing this tale to the police. Supposedly, they drove up and they tried to talk James into helping them dispose of this body. James reportedly said he wanted nothing to do with it, and the two men really didn't like that answer, and supposedly Arthur even kind of threatened James not to tell anyone.
Wow.
So when these two boys couldn't get help from their friend James, they then drove to the house of two other classmates who were named Ken Wise and I think it's Roman Lenz. And somehow these guys talked Lenz into letting them load Mike's body into the trunk of his car. Then all four boys plus this random girl all loaded into Lenz's car. So if you're keeping track, that is 6 teenagers who are now all involved in this murder. Now here is one of the most frustrating parts for me. This group of teenagers was then pulled over by a policeman.
No.
It was just a routine stop and the police officer just let them go. It's maddening to think that if he had checked the trunk, then Mike's poor parents would have had their son to bury. Moving past that, the teens, now probably truly panicking, drove to a secluded area where they then buried Mike in a shallow grave. It's crazy to me that 6 teenagers managed to keep their mouths closed for so long over a murder. Just my theory, but I think they were probably all scared of Roger. He already killed a guy, so who is to say he wouldn't get rid of them too? Not making excuses for them, but it's just my theory. So after James Etheridge finishes his tale to the police, they immediately open up an investigation. Word got out to Roger Patty pretty quick that Etheridge had spilled the beans, and I guess he even tried to threaten some of the witnesses not to testify, allegedly. And on May 9th, 1975, Roger was arrested and indicted for first-degree murder. So 9 years later, he was arrested and charged. Frustratingly, the alleged accomplices were not indicted because of the statute of limitations had expired in 1971. So sadly, this murder case was hampered big time because of a lack of a body. While the police have all these witnesses, it's hard to convince a jury of first-degree murder with no body. During the trial, Roger said, quote, "I'm sorry about what happened. I didn't mean for it to happen. It's just done," end quote. Joe Balfe, the district attorney, focused on the premeditated aspects of the murder, including his decision to carry a gun, to an argument about the love triangle, especially that if Roger had been unarmed during the confrontation, quote, Mike Christian would be alive today, end quote. Sensing where things were going, the defense offered a deal, a no contest plea on a lesser charge of manslaughter. The prosecution accepted, and on July 21st, 1977, Judge Victor Carlson sentenced Roger to 15 years in prison. So yeah, this man only got 15 years for murdering someone in cold blood. Unfortunately, as we know with our judicial system, he probably only served half of that, not even the amount of time that Mike got to be alive.
Infuriating.
Yeah, I couldn't find if this was true or how long he ended up serving. I tried looking for it, but I couldn't find it. And furthermore, Mike's body has never been found. Supposedly, Roger tried to lead them to the spot where he thought he buried Mike, but no body was found. Some other points of thought, I guess, is that Rogers had tried to appeal his sentence over the fact that the statute of limitations should have applied to him in his manslaughter plea or something like that.
A technicality.
Yeah, but as far as I could tell, I think that was overruled. And also during the trial, Roger said that him and Mike met while driving. He said Mike willingly got into his car and they drove out to this area to discuss Judy. It was then while discussing things in the car that Roger says Mike supposedly went to choke him. And it was because of this he pulled out a gun and shot him. So, a couple things I see wrong with this. Mike never would have abandoned that car. Mm-hmm. From everything I've read about the kid, he loved that car. So I don't think he would just willingly abandon it in town to get into this car of this other guy. And also, why would he willingly get into a car of a guy he knows doesn't like him?
Right.
That just doesn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. And also, I think the only reason he said Mike tried to choke him was so he could say it was self-defense. Mm-hmm. So, these are my theories, just speculation. So, what I think actually happened that night was I think Roger and Arthur saw Mike out and about. They forced Mike into Roger's car and they drove him out to that area. I think he was forced and didn't willingly get into the car because, again, why would he? And B, he supposedly had other plans that night because that's what Judy said, he had other things he was doing. I think Arthur probably thought they were just going to scare Mike, maybe even beat him up or something like that. But I think he was shocked when Roger actually fired the gun and killed him. I think that they had Arthur's car the whole time, and Roger's car was kept at home. This way, Mike wouldn't be suspicious seeing Arthur's car drive up to him.
Oh, good point.
Mm-hmm. And supposedly, and this is just supposed, Roger's father actually knew of the murder all along and chose to cover it up. So who's to say he wouldn't cover up the fact that Mike's car was actually, or not Mike, I'm sorry, that Roger's car was actually home that whole night, you know?
Wow.
Also, I think this was a way for Roger to rope Arthur into his scheme because technically Arthur would be helping dispose of a body if it was in Arthur's car. So I think that was a way of him shutting Arthur up so Arthur wouldn't go to the police because Arthur knew he'd be an accessory. Mm-hmm. Arthur continued to panic about the fact that it was his car they were using, so that's when Roger said they could try their friends Etheridge, Lenz, and Wise. And I also think Roger 100% knows where his body is. He's just chosen not to say anything because he knows there'd be evidence that would put him away for longer. But I guess since it's been so long, he probably couldn't be
the rate of decomposing.
Tried a second time, but
also, I don't know how far involved that would be.
Yeah. But that is the case of Mike Christian.
Wow. I mean, to hold that within yourself at such a pivotal age in your life.
Yeah. It's just astounding to me that six teenagers plus this random girl whose name is never given in any newspaper source, especially her of all people, just kept this completely quiet for 8 years.
I think you're totally right, though, to think like that he'd done that to someone. What holds him from doing it to the rest of them? Yeah. And you want to think like these crimes of passion are so quick and so violent. To watch it unfold, I mean, you always hear about how you never know people are going to respond to finding out about violent outbursts like that to someone you know so closely.
Yeah. I just thought this case, like, It was between this one and another one when I was researching, but I just thought this one was so interesting just because of how the story unfolded, number one, and number two, just like it went from one guy's car to another,
Right.
and that it just, the whole affair was just kept secret for 8 years. It was just crazy to me.
Like, it's hard enough for someone to keep that themselves when it's just one person committing a crime. To have that many involved is very challenging.
Yeah. Then there's that policeman. If he literally would have just...
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know he would need probable cause. But you would think 6 teenagers or five teenagers in the 60s driving around... You'd think maybe he'd suspect marijuana, therefore giving him probable cause. He could have searched the trunk of that car. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little hard on him, but...
I'm the first to say, too, like, during that decade, during that time, you hear, kids that age, maybe they just drove around for fun at night. It's one of those activities. It's a different time.
Yeah, that's true.
That very well could have been. Just like you said, even Mike's own parents weren't too worried about him.
Yeah.
'Cause kids in that area, that decade...
Yeah.
Getting up to stuff.
Very true. Yeah.
Wow. We made sure to pick the 16-year-olds for this week, didn't we?
We did, didn't we? That's
Wow.
funny. We did not plan that at all.
Not intended.
Yeah, because we don't discuss our cases with each other beforehand because we wait.
Keep the surprise alive.
Yeah. Yeah, we let each other know the names, therefore we don't show up with the same case. But yeah.
Jeez.
And actually,
That's a
your
good
case
one.
popped up quite a bit while I was researching,
Yeah.
but it took everything in me not to click the links because Brooke actually told me her case before mine.
I said dibs.
So I'm like,
Yeah, with like the newness of it, it's been less than a year since it's being solved.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, article-wise, it was a plethora. I'm sure you could do a whole other podcast on just genetic genealogy in and of itself.
For sure, yeah. Let us know if you want us to do a national parks or genetic genealogy. We could do like an extra episode or, after our first 100 subscribers or something, we could do like an extra, something fun. Let
Dive
us
a little
know.
deeper.
Yeah, yeah, let us know.
Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, so what's next? Is it Arizona?
I think
Alabama, Alaska, Arizona?
I don't know the song. I'm just waiting for you to say it. I just go with
I think
it.
it's Arizona. I always sing this song in my head. Alabama, Alaska,
I literally don't know
Arizona,
it.
Arkansas. I could go on. Again, there's my nerd card. It comes out every day.
Is that nerd card? I don't know. You can't even call it that. That's reaching.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.